Beginning on the rudder, first thing I did is got a nice fresh white tabletop, all clean and smooth, and I started laying it out from the print. So I've laid out the aft portion of it. I need the little piece that goes around the front, I need to lay that out still. I get that done and then get on to laying some tubes. I'm going to just use the same blocks I used for the elevator and horizontal stabilizer work to set this, since the tubes are the same size mostly. This is 7/8 and these are 3/8. So I just line up my little match mark right on the line. Get the one on the other end and I can put the tube in it. So, one of the first steps here on the center tube is to crimp the end down to 5/8. So it'll match up with the tube coming around. So I just got my vise set up with a couple contractor shims for windows and doors. And I'm going to crimp it down until I get to 5/8. Well, a little extra. Almost there. Alright, so with that end crimped, I'll just put this guy in place and start working from there. Next up, I'm going to work on the rudder horn. So I blanked out some 90,000, my scarf joint, and the little collar that goes on the bottom. So I'm going to take this guy to the mill and put the critical holes in it. So I got a blank of 90,000ths material. A little wider, a little longer than necessary, and I've just found center where I'm going to put the 1-inch hole. Put some references on there so I don't do anything dumb. Drill this hole out, drill these, then open him up to 1 inch. And here's the tube that has to go in that hole, so just, of course it's going to fit, but checking to make sure I'm not doing anything dumb. Continuing on this rudder horn, so I've made the two washers and put a 3/16 screw through them so that I can mark out what shape this has to end up at. This is the bend line for the tabs that'll go down here. So all I got to do right now though, draw the arc around these. Take these washers off. I just need to bring that back to the center line. Now it's time for some work on the bandsaw. Alright, so I cleaned it up a little bit, took care of the edges, got close on the outside corners, but those are going to get welded, so I'm not too worried. So now I'm going to bend this flange. Alright, so with that all formed, I'm going to weld these washers on. So I'm just going to use these screws to hold them down. Weld them and then clean up the end. I'm going to fit this tube to this and then weld it. So I've got a center mark on the hole. I want one down the back side of this because it goes that way. So I'm just going to eyeball down here where it actually is on this side because it's easy to see. Carry it over. And then I'm going to set it down the table and roll it over just until this marker hits that line. And I can just roll it across. And now I've got that line down here. Now I can just line them up. Alright, I got that tube in there. It's lined up on my line here that I put on. And it looks very square. Should be. Yep. It's the correct relationship as far as the cut is towards the ears back here, so I'm going to go ahead and tack that in place. Alright, I'm getting all the little pieces that have to go on the leading edge of the rudder before you could lay in the trailing edge and weld the ribs in and stuff. So, because all this will be captured in there. So I've got the horn, it's done. I took a reamer to the inside and cleaned it up so it fits over the shaft nicely. I have the hinges for the rudder, which I fabricated when I did the elevator. But what I'm going to do now is radius this end here. So the hinge, once it's on there, can't come off anymore, so it'd be very difficult to do that later. But we can't put the hole in yet because the hole will be drilled to the other tubes. So anyhow, basically I just take and I have the dimension, which I think is 1 5/8 for the center. I'm just going to lay out the center line. Take my washer, square it up on the center line. Then I'll nip off all that extra material and make that contour. And then all that have to be done on this when it goes on the actual fuselage will be to match drill it. One other piece to make is a little 1-inch spacer, so I've got it blanked and I will trim it down, and it's got a hole in it too, drill the hole. So this leading edge for the rudder here, so it gets a hinge. It's got to go up there in between the ribs, and it gets the horn, which will go that way, but for right now I'll put it sideways. Then it gets the hinge and a collar. is. So that has a nice fit to the curve. So I will lop him off to close to the right dimensions and then start working on the trailing edge. So I just started bending this rear tube. So I did the initial start of the bend, and one thing I like to do is get some stop blocks, so I always put the tube back in the same spot as I'm bending it. Otherwise you kind of have a tendency to keep moving it back and forth to try to find the best fit, and then you end up chasing your tail. So I've got a nice start to this curve, so I put a stop block where that matches up nicely. I'm actually going to put one, not this one's too long, over here on the side, and then I'll be able to just keep putting it back to the exact same spot. It makes it easy to tell where you need to bend. Rather than, if you don't do that, you end up kind of, you know, always saying, oh, slide it this way, it looks a little better. Slide it that way, it looks a little better. And you mess something else up. So there's my two stop blocks. I can bring this in here, hold it up against there, and then just work down the line. So I finished bending the 3/8 trailing edge here. It looks good, fits the line well. It's got a little twist in it I got to take out. I'll work on that in a little bit. But as you can see, it's short down there on the end. And I knew it was going to end up short. Basically, when I did my bulk order of tubing, I couldn't get this. And so I had to have it FedExed. I ordered it in 6-foot lengths because I'm cheap. So I'll do a scarf joint down there and add about 12 inches on the bottom down there. So I've got this leading edge 5/8 tube and the back tube bent into a reasonable shape. So one thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to notch the end of this tube so that these two will line up evenly out on the outside. And then I'm going to cut it to length so that I can weld that small little bushing that goes on the end in place. Because that's where the lower tube, this 3/8 on the bottom, mates up. This isn't very critical. I'm going to put a line down the center of this tube, just a reference line. It looks like it's about 1.25 inches across. Nope, 1 1/8, I'm sorry. So there's the center. I'll take it down. Just eyeball, it would be plenty good enough. Alright, so obviously this guy here, all we have to do is do a little fish mouth here. This guy here, we're going to have to remove. You know, you don't have to do any major math. You can just see the difference there. The difference there in the two tubes. So after playing around with the grinder, I got a pretty good fit up. Happy with that. So now I'm going to put this into the jig and determine the length of this tube. So one of the easiest ways for me to get this length right will be to put this tube in place and put this tube up on its standoffs. And I'm going to use the exact same standoffs I used for the elevator. So they have a line justified to the side of the tube holder here, so that this line is the outside of the tube, which is the way it is on the print because they give you outside dimensions. Here we're working from a center line, here we're working from the outside line. So anyhow, I have these blocks in the way, which I used when I was bending this tube to give it a home position. So now that it's done, I can get rid of them. One thing that always happens with this table is when you put screws in, you create a little pucker under there. So I just keep a cold chisel nearby and I I just take those off so I have a nice smooth surface to work from. The first thing I'm going to do is line that line up there and put it very close over here and screw that down. And this will give me also going to get rid of that pucker I just made so that this guy will sit down nice. So now that's the start of it. I'll put the rest of those on there, and then that pushed up to here will give me the actual location for this tube. So with this tube sitting in its cradles, I'm just going to mark the center line up to this tube and cut it off. So now with that clipped off, I'll just line it up on the center line. Little clamp on it. Now I can bring this guy up and start working it. With the top set in the right position, I can put this collar on and locate it. But nothing can be put on this tube after this because that end is crimped and this end will have a collar. So you've got to put all the hinges on. And this rudder horn, which keeps this hinge down here from moving along the shaft. So now with all that on there, we can put the collar in place and tack weld it. So I've completed fitting up that rear tube into place. This has been cut to length. So the next thing I'm going to work on is this front rib. In order to put this tube in the top, I really kind of need that rib to kind of set location. So I'll make that guy up. So I've got my ribs out of the router, clamped the blank in between them. I'm going to go make a profiled rib. If you want to see how to make profiled ribs, watch my video on horizontal stabilizers. In there I cover it in great depth. Alright, so I finished making this rib for up here, this profiled rib. And so now I'm going to get this top tube, this 5/8 tube, tacked in place. So this smaller tube here is all lined up on its profile and it's locked in place. So I can bring the center tube up till that touches nicely, and then I can bring this one over until it's smooth on the top and the elevation's correct by shimming it here. Get a tack or two on there, and then I can work on out here getting this rib in place. It's a little bit finicky. now I've cut this tube off to the right length. And I put a stop in here so that I'm bringing this rib to the same position every time I'm checking it here. So it's a little long right now, so I'm going to take a little more out of the back and until I get this nose to come out right. Alright, so I've got the rib fit the way I like it. And I put another stop on here, so I'm going to go ahead and screw this rib to these stops. That'll hold the elevation, and I'll be able to go in and tack this nose. So now that this rib is attached to these blocks, it's fixed in position, this nose is captured in position. I'm going to go ahead and put some tacks on it, and this will be good for right now. And I'll go on to these ribs back here. With the front profile rib in place and the top tube tacked in place, I'm going to start working on these 3 ribs that go on the main section of the rudder. And these ribs are the same as the ones that are done in the elevator. So if you want to see how to make them, watch the elevator video. So I've fabricated all these straight ribs. So now I'm just fitting them to get them to sit in the right place, trimming the tails and getting it all ready to tack weld together. So I'm getting some light tacks on all the components now. So like I've tacked the ends of this one, I can go back and make sure it's square before I give it in the mold. And I'll go through the whole thing, and then I'll go in and I'll tack the inside corners before I turn it over. So I've got all the tacks on this side. Take it out of the jig here and tack the other side. Look at that, looks like a rudder. Just a couple things left to do on this. One, I need to put these 1/4" stiffeners in, go in the corners or all the top up here and the bottom. And the other thing is I need to weld the rudder horn in place. So I'm going to do these stiffeners first, and then I'll get onto the rudder horn. So in order to weld on the rudder horn, I'm going to draw a square T on the tabletop here so that I can line the rudder up on this line here, get it vertical, and then I will match up the horn to this line so it'll all be square. Alright, so it's vertical and it's parallel. So now I want this to be parallel to this line because these are perpendicular. So first thing I'm going to do is put a 20,000 shim in here, and that's just to hold some gap between the rudder hinge and the rudder horn. I don't want that down tight, so I want to have a little bit of give. So then I can take my square and reading on the scale down here, I can read back to it touches the horn and get it even on each side. So right there looks really good, just a short 7/8. So now it's 90 degrees to the tail. It's got some clearance for the hinge. I can go ahead and tack it in place. All right, that feels pretty good. So this is it for the rudder. For now, anyhow, it still needs the horn for the tail wheel and all that. But I'll do that after I decide what kind of tail wheel is going on it and after this is mounted on the fuselage. So I'm going to put this guy away and go on to the fuselage.